June 4, 1942. 10:52 a.m. Japanese carrier Hiryu, located 150 miles northwest of Midway. Lieutenant Mio Kobayashi's hand shook as he tried to plot coordinates on his navigation chart, his pencil lingering over map points that seemed inexplicable. Through the ready room's porthole, he observed Admiral Yamaguchi Tamon intently examining reconnaissance images, his face displaying utter disbelief. It was not anger or bewilderment, but the sudden comprehension that a grave error had occurred. Impossible. She was confirmed lost at the Coral Sea. I personally witnessed her aflame, leaning to one side, abandoned. The photo revealed an American carrier launching planes. Even with the photo's grain, its distinctive island superstructure was unmistakable. 3 carriers. The Americans actually had 3 carriers at Midway, not just 2. The assured prospect of victory 4 Japanese carriers against 2 U.S. ships had just evaporated. Merely 27 days before, during the Coral Sea battle, Japanese aviators left this same carrier seemingly doomed, oil spilling as she lay still. Admiral Takagi relayed word to Tokyo. Yorktown-class carrier destroyed. Naval General Staff then excluded her from their strategic assessments. Now, astonishingly, here was the USS Yorktown, evidently operational, her planes already descending toward the Japanese armada. Over the intercom, Kobayashi could hear confusion spreading rapidly throughout Hiryu. With 3 carriers, the Americans had 230 planes, not 150. The presence of 3 carriers meant the planned ambush had been flipped. 3 carriers altered everything. Imperial Navy intelligence regarding U.S. repair capability had been disastrously mistaken. The appearance of Yorktown at Midway, which should have been impossible, dismantled the Japanese Navy's critical industrial belief. In their analysis, proper repairs from battle damage demanded painstaking craftsmanship, several months of labor, and strict honor. A ship pierced by a 551 lb bomb, with 5 decks holed, ruptured fuel tanks, and destroyed sections, would require at least 90 days in a top-tier shipyard. These calculations had seemed definitive. Enterprise and Hornet were thought to be the only functioning American carriers in the Pacific. Lexington rested at the bottom of the Coral Sea. Saratoga was still undergoing torpedo damage repairs, and the new Essex class would not be service-ready until 1943. Japanese intelligence had repeatedly verified these facts. Yet those calculations no longer mattered as SBD Dauntless dive bombers plunged down at Japanese flight decks. As Admiral Nagumo's team feverishly redid their sums, one fact became inescapable. Their entire Operation MI was founded on the belief that the Americans could not possibly have accomplished what they evidently had. Prior to the ruse at Coral Sea, May 8, 1942, Coral Sea region, situated 500 miles to the northeast of Australia. The strike unfolded with flawless precision. 18 Type 99 dive bombers from the carriers Shoku and Zuikaku located the USS Yorktown as it appeared from behind a rain squall. The attack leader, Lieutenant Commander Kakuichi Takahashi, observed his aviators score a direct strike near the island superstructure. A 250 kilogram bomb pierced through the flight deck and detonated 5 decks below. The explosion could be seen from an altitude of 10,000 feet. Yorktown, leaking a 10-meter oil slick from the bow, emerged with flames visible through breaches in her hull. Her velocity slowed to what Japanese spotters judged as 6 knots. The Japanese carrier-based pilots returning from the mission relayed that the ship was finished, listing so steeply that salvaging operations were out of the question. Pictures illustrated destroyers closing in to render aid. Admiral Takagi Teo communicated with Combined Fleet Command. 2 U.S. carriers, he reported, had been destroyed. Lexington and Yorktown were out of commission. News reached the Emperor. Naval analysts at Kerr struck Yorktown off their operational charts. When preparing for the Midway campaign, they excluded her from their considerations. Captain Elliot Buckmaster, in command of Yorktown, charted a different course. As the vessel made her escape at 20 knots, as opposed to the 6 knots assessed by the Japanese, his damage control personnel achieved their initial feat. The blast resulted in 66 casualties instantly, annihilated 6 interior sections, demolished the elevator motors, and gashed fuel tanks over 30 structural frames. Under any naval architectural criteria, Yorktown's repairs should have taken months in a dry dock. The return voyage, once thought unattainable, spanned May 8 to May 27, 1942. From Coral Sea to Pearl Harbor, the 3,300-mile journey offered an initial insight into the American philosophy of industrial repair. Even though Yorktown's damage was extensive, her sailors embraced restoration with a mentality uncharacteristic of Japanese tradition. Repair it quickly, get it back in the fight. Chief Carpenter Boyd Mackenzie paid no heed to the guidelines of damage control handbooks. Rather than choosing to properly swap out ruined beams, which would have required dry dock facilities, he opted to weld steel plates atop them, producing makeshift but effective fixes. The machinery compartments told their own tale. The bomb had wrecked the No. 2 elevator machinery along with damaging 3 boiler spaces. The engineering crew reassembled systems from the vessel's workshop spares, manufacturing fresh parts from sheets of metal and improvising with gear meant for alternate functions. Although Yorktown steamed at 20 knots, damage that should have restricted her to 12 knots, American submarines updated Pearl Harbor on her whereabouts. The Japanese codebreakers, having intercepted these encrypted signals, used their own metrics. They deduced that a crippled ship could only average 5 to 8 knots. Their figures indicated she would not arrive at Pearl Harbor before mid-June, making timely repairs ahead of the Midway action planned for June 4 impossible. At Pearl Harbor, what was thought unachievable suddenly became reality. On May 27, 1942, at 1 p.m., the Yorktown arrived at the Pearl Harbor Naval Base, presenting a grim spectacle. A 10-mile-long oil slick could be seen from Diamond Head. The ship was canted to port, wisps of smoke drifting from patched-up areas. Rear Admiral Aubrey Fitch, who had seen the destruction up close, sent his evaluation by cable. He estimated at least 90 days were needed to restore the ship for combat. Nevertheless, in May 1942, Pearl Harbor had evolved from a peaceful naval installation into a place unlike any before. It had become a forward repair base pushing the boundaries of possibility. The effort to recover the battleships after December 7 led to a workforce who measured progress by hours rather than months. Admiral Chester Nimitz greeted Yorktown at her berth. In contrast to Japanese admirals who led operations from secure battleships many miles behind the front, Nimitz waded straight into oil-coated water in dry dock No. 1. Examining the vessel's losses himself even as the dock continued to fill. His trousers were soaked and his hands stained black with oil as he turned to address Captain Claude Gillette, the yard superintendent, as well as Lieutenant Commander H.J. Finstead, the hull repair specialist. He declared, "We have to return this ship to service in 3 days." An endless silence ensued. Eventually, Finstead swallowed hard and responded, "Yes, sir." Station Hypo represented the intelligence necessity. The 3-day time frame was not arbitrary. In the basement of Building 1, a mere 400 yards from the dock, Commander Joseph Rochefort and his Station Hypo team had broken JN-25, the Japanese Naval Operations Code. They discovered that AF was code for Midway. They learned the assault was scheduled for June 4. They also uncovered the Japanese battle order, 4 carriers of the 1st Air Fleet. Most importantly, they realized the Japanese thought only Enterprise and Hornet would oppose them. Japan assumed Yorktown was destroyed. These revelations changed the Yorktown's overhaul from urgent to absolutely vital. Without her, Americans would be outnumbered 2 to 4. With Yorktown, the odds improved to 3 against 4, still a long shot, but achievable. The 72-hour sprint began May 28 at 5:30 a.m. at Dry Dock No. 1. Workers began boarding Yorktown before the dock fully drained, wading through water ankle deep, numbering 1,400 in total. They represented every trade on the base: welders, electricians, shipfitters, machinists, pipe fitters, and sheet metal workers. Many were continuing from late shifts spent on other vessels. Their task would last for 72 hours without stop. The repair work ran counter to the Japanese approach to industry. Rather than methodical planning and strict layers of approval, the repairs were managed as an organized frenzy. Foremen made verdicts on the spot. Employees undertook tasks outside their specialties. The only directive: restore her to fighting shape. The precise methods would have shocked Japanese naval designers. Regarding bomb damage, a 551-pound bomb had ravaged her from flight deck down through 5 decks. Japanese procedures would call for removing affected steel, custom building replacement parts, and reconstructing all impacted levels. Estimated time: 30 days. Pearl Harbor's technique: keep ruined structures in place, weld huge steel plates over the damage, brace weak areas with pilfered wooden supports. Time spent: 18 hours. Fuel tanks suffered near hits, causing ruptures across 30 frames and tainting her fuel. The Japanese method would involve draining, cleaning, checking, and repairing each tank individually, requiring 2 weeks. Americans simply removed the tainted fuel, plugged leaks with quick-setting cement designed for airstrips, covered the rest with welded metal, and disregarded any tanks too damaged for speedy restoration, sealing them shut. Time needed: 11 hours. As for the machinery, 3 boiler rooms were harmed, slashing superheat ability by 70% and reducing top speed to 27 knots versus 32.5. The Japanese would exchange all the affected equipment. Pearl Harbor's team ignored the missing superheating, accepted the decreased speed, and concentrated on basic operation. Time required: 14 hours. For the workers, reality was something else. 21-year-old electrician Lewis Walters later remembered, "We didn't have the luxury for standard repairs. We ran new cables right over decks instead of through the conduits. We welded steel over gaps instead of replacing broken parts. Everything was makeshift, ugly, but it worked." The repair by the numbers: 20 tons of steel plate were welded into position, 35 miles of electrical wire installed, 400 tons of ruined fuel flushed, 3 shattered compartments sealed, with constant arc welding drawing so much power it caused intermittent blackouts throughout Oahu. Meals were eaten during shifts, and naps taken in 15-minute spells against bulkheads. When so much electricity was used up by welding that hospitals went dark, residents of Oahu accepted the rolling outages without protest. When timber was needed, local construction firms delivered it instantly, requiring no paperwork. The hull work contradicted naval architectural standards. Split seams were wedged tight with wood, then covered with metal and welded, resulting in what an engineer labeled a metal scab. Electrical work abandoned the appearance of convention. Cables were slung over decks, through open hatches, and along the ceilings. When Yorktown departed on May 30, 1942, at 9 in the morning, shipyard workers were still aboard, completing repairs as the carrier accelerated. They disembarked as soon as Yorktown exited the harbor. The air group manning her flight deck was itself a sign of adaptability. Bombing Squadron 3 from USS Saratoga, Torpedo Squadron 3 cobbled together from those who survived, and Fighting Squadron 3 merging aviators from 3 groups who had not previously worked together. As Yorktown moved beyond Pearl Harbor, the dock was lined with workers who had accomplished the inconceivable. Chief Hull Technician Finstead subsequently remarked, "We sent her out looking like a fighter patched up between bouts. She wasn't much to look at, but she could still hit back." Point Luck Rendezvous, June 2, 1942. 325 miles northeast of Midway, Yorktown joined Enterprise and Hornet at Point Luck. The sailors aboard the remaining 2 carriers were visibly surprised. Commander Wade McCluskey, Enterprise's air group leader, later noted, "We knew Yorktown had taken hits at Coral Sea. We figured, at best, she'd make it as a reserve. Instead, she was launching planes, running flight operations, appearing fully combat-ready." Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, who now commanded from the Yorktown, grasped something vital. The Yorktown's presence wasn't solely about carrying more planes, it was about destroying the Japanese sense of certainty. In his last staff meeting, Fletcher said, "For months the Japanese have planned their offensive. Every detail calculated for engagement with two carriers. The moment our planes appear over their fleet, that certainty vanishes." Japanese morale was high. On board the flagship Akagi, Admiral Nagumo Chuichi made his final arrangements with unwavering assurance. 4 carriers Akagi, Kaga, Sōryū, and Hiryu brought a total of 248 planes against 2 American carriers that had 150 aircraft. The Japanese aircrews, veterans of the Pearl Harbor attack, faced American crews who had not yet claimed a victory in a carrier clash. Captain Minoru Genda, the officer overseeing air operations for Nagumo, had simulated every conceivable situation. Even were the Americans to gain the element of surprise, Japanese pilots' skill and superiority in numbers would secure victory. The only potential factor that might alter this balance was the arrival of a third American carrier, but intelligence had verified this was not possible. Yorktown was counted as lost. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had commanded the Pearl Harbor raid, was suffering from appendicitis, but continued to observe operations. Years afterward, he documented, "Our entire plan was built on information that the Americans had 2 carriers. Not about 2, not possibly 3, precisely 2. If this was incorrect, all our planning was flawed." June 4 brought the breaking point. At 4:30 a.m., the Japanese carriers dispatched 108 airplanes toward Midway. The early hours proceeded precisely as intended. Nagumo kept back 108 aircraft in reserve for striking at the American fleet, confident that his ambush would unfold. At 7:10 a.m., a Japanese scout plane sighted an American carrier. The Japanese had only anticipated finding one. Nagumo gave the order to modify the reserve aircraft, arming them with torpedoes to engage ships. Uncertainty then arose. The scout now indicated it appeared there were 2 carriers, which still fit within the Japanese expectations. At 8:20 a.m., Hornet's torpedo squadron began its assault. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron took 15 TBD Devastator planes toward the Japanese task force without fighter cover. All 15 aircraft were destroyed. Only Ensign George Gay remained alive. Nevertheless, Waldron's attack drew the Japanese combat air patrol down near the waves. By 8:40 a.m., Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise carried out their approach. Of the 14 Devastators, 10 were shot down. No hits were scored, but again, the defending Zeros were lured to lower altitude. At 9:15 a.m., Yorktown's Torpedo Squadron made its approach. At this moment, the reality dawned. While another 12 Devastators initiated their attack paths, Japanese observers counted their numbers. There were too many attacking planes. Their calculations failed. 3 American carriers were present, not 2. On the bridge of Hiryu, Admiral Yamaguchi worked the numbers quickly. The realization that there were 3 American carriers altered everything. But before any adjustments or orders could be made, and before the Japanese force could react, U.S. dive bombers arrived overhead. At 10:22 a.m., the critical moment took place. Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie, leader of Yorktown's Bombing Squadron 3, had become disoriented but located the Japanese fleet by following the path left by a destroyer. His contingent of 17 Solomon Islands Dauntless dive bombers appeared above the Japanese ships simultaneously with bombers from Enterprise. This coincidence caused by Yorktown's launch being delayed due to damaged boilers, and not intentional timing. From 14,000 feet, Leslie observed the 4 Japanese carriers with their decks crowded with fueled, armed planes. The enemy fighter cover remained at sea level. Within 6 minutes, 3 carriers of the Japanese force were ablaze. Sōryū, hit by a trio of bombs from Leslie's formation, erupted in flames that could be observed from 50 miles away. Japanese retaliation. Striking at a phantom. Admiral Yamaguchi, now left with only Hiryu, confronted overwhelming odds 3 American carriers remained. He still launched 18 dive bombers and 6 fighter planes at the closest American target, Yorktown. As the Japanese flight neared, its leader Lieutenant Mo Kobayashi peered through binoculars at the carrier and felt disoriented. The superstructure, the shape of the flight deck. This was Yorktown, the same ship believed to have been destroyed at Coral Sea. At 12:05 p.m., 3 bombs hit Yorktown, igniting blazes and breaking steam pipes. The carrier lost all power. Japanese airmen, for the second time in 27 days, left Yorktown burning and appeared to have finished her off. Yet, even while engulfed in flames, Yorktown had altered the whole situation. That morning, her attack had sunk Sōryū. By drawing Hōryū's attention, Yorktown spared Enterprise and Hornet, enabling their counterattack to finish Hōryū 4 hours later. Damage control mastery. Captain Buckmaster initiated damage checks. The hasty, patchwork repairs made at Pearl Harbor stood their ground. The welds had not ruptured. Chief Engineer John F. Delaney reported, "The Japanese bombs damaged us, but the patchwork from Pearl is strong. 2 hours is all I ask." Within 60 minutes, 3 boilers were brought back online, flames subdued, and listing reduced through counter-flooding. By 1:40 p.m., Yorktown had achieved 19 knots, was refueling its fighters, and seemed sufficiently restored that, at 2:30 p.m. when Hōryū's second wave arrived, the Japanese pilots presumed they were attacking a separate undamaged carrier. Confusion among the second wave. At 2:30 p.m., Lieutenant Tomonaga Joichi led 5 torpedo bombers, all that Hōryū could muster, anticipating a burning Yorktown, but instead encountered a carrier underway and launching fighters. His perplexed report to Hōryū implied an attack on an entirely different carrier, leading Japanese staff to conclude that there could be 4 American carriers present. Although Tomonaga's torpedo assault would ultimately be fatal for Yorktown, the chaos prevented the Japanese from mounting a coordinated response before dive bombers from Enterprise located and destroyed Hōryū by 5 p.m., the closing act. On June 6 at 1:31 p.m., the Japanese submarine I-168, under Lieutenant Commander Yohachi Tanabe's command, discovered the Yorktown while she was being towed. Tanabe fired off 4 torpedoes. 2 found their mark on Yorktown, while 1 struck destroyer USS Hammond nearby. As Yorktown capsized on June 7, Tanabe recorded in his log that he had sunk an American carrier, probably Saratoga. Even as she went down, Yorktown generated confusion. The Japanese never came to realize that the carrier present at Midway was the same ship they believed they had sunk during the Coral Sea engagement.